seen that. Okay, it being 7 o'clock, we will open this meeting of the Kenmore Planning Commission. The first item on the agenda is citizen comments on items other than the public hearing topic. Any citizens care to share thoughts on things other than the public hearing topic? See none, we will move into the public hearing on critical areas and Shoreline Master Program amendments. So our ground rules are please state your name and address for the record. Please limit your comments to 3 minutes. And we'll start with Mark Eaton. Oh, excuse me. Before we start that, our city staff would like to say a few things.
Thank you, Chair. So just to provide some overall context of why we are updating the Shoreline Master Program and critical area regulations, we are required by the state to periodically update the Shoreline Master Program, and that is due by the end of June. As there are critical areas also in the shoreline, we wanted to make sure that our critical area regulations were consistent in both in and out of the shoreline jurisdiction. So that is why we elected to update not only the Shoreline Master Program, but also the critical area regulations. So that's the background. So prior to getting into the public hearing comments, I would ask Laurie Anderson to kind of give some overview of what the purpose of the regulations is for the hearing tonight.
Good evening. So tonight is the public hearing on the preliminary amendments to the critical area regulations and Shoreline Master Program. And as an introduction, I thought I'd summarize most or some of the most significant amendments. Attachment 11 in your packet is general information about the most significant amendments. And there are extra copies at the front table. So I'll start with the critical area regulations. As you know, we broke these up into sections, and so I'm going to talk about them by section. In general provisions, we're now allowing dense native vegetation or a fence along a buffer boundary. The public agency and utility exception may be used for extension or expansion of a linear facility, such as a street or utility, or for an expansion of an existing public facility. For wetlands, the wetland ratings have been changed to match the Department of Ecology's scheme. The wetland buffers have been changed to coordinate with that new rating system. And as you know, Ecology has recently provided comments about that, and that's an issue we're still working on. And the Department of Ecology's wetland mitigation ratios have been adopted. For streams and lakes, the stream typing has been changed to, again, to match the state scheme. We're trying to do that for consistency of application. So folks don't have to do one thing for the city of Kenmore and another thing for the Department of Ecology potentially. And then the stream buffers have been changed to match that new typing system. For fish and wildlife habitats of importance, there's new treatment of bald eagle habitat based on state and federal delisting and updated science. And the buffer for the great blue heron rookery has been reduced based on updated specific science about herons. Geologically hazardous areas, there's a new process for a third-party review of a critical areas report. Certain types of development are now prohibited in high landslide hazard areas, and there is an opportunity to reduce lot sizes in the R4 zone to minimize impact on landslide hazard areas, so a clustering opportunity in those hazard areas. Flood hazards, the standards have been consolidated. They used to be in Title 16 and Title 18. They're now together in Title 18. And there's been no real adjustment to the standards, but some of the King County holdover designations, zero rise floodway, flood fringe, et cetera, have been eliminated. And all the revisions have been reviewed by FEMA, the Federal Emergency Management Agency. They administer the flood insurance program. So their review is very important to make sure that Kenmore residents can continue with flood insurance. So they have been reviewing it, and we have comments now from the Department of Ecology on the flood regulations. So that's another area that we're still working on, and we anticipate some refinements to that. Groundwater susceptibility areas. This is a new standard and a map that goes with it that have been put in place. So turning to the Shoreline Master Program, excuse me, there's a new shoreline designation created, Swamp Creek Commercial, in the area of the Kenmore Lanes and the Starbucks farther to the east. And then clarification that Kenmore continues to prohibit new heavy manufacturing or industrial uses in the shoreline. The new shoreline use table matches the use table in the zoning code, or as closely as it possibly can, so that there's consistency between the two sets of regulations. And that more expansive table describes shoreline modifications and conditions. So the use table's been expanded and the shoreline modifications table has been expanded. Shoreline modifications are things like docks, piers, etc. The section on water access structures has been revised, and there are new standards for overwater structures, specifically in the Sammamish River, which are different from those in Lake Washington. And then the shoreline density and dimensions table has been revised, particularly with regard to buffers along the Sammamish River, where we've tried to acknowledge existing conditions. Previously, those buffers weren't addressed. They were considered under the critical area regulations. So as I mentioned, we're still working with the Department of Ecology on standards for wetland buffers and alterations. We had translated our existing buffers into the ecology system, and the department has raised some concerns with this approach. Their maximum buffers for some wetland types exceed the city's proposed buffer widths, sometimes significantly, but we're working with them to explain how local conditions may merit the original scheme. And with regard to allowing buffer reductions, the city has always had an ability to reduce a wetland buffer up to 25% of the wetland buffer width in a degraded buffer situation if the rest of the buffer is enhanced. And I think staff continues to believe that this opportunity encourages improvement of buffer conditions in the city without negative impact to functions and values. Ecology is somewhat uncomfortable with this approach, and so again, we're talking with them about hopefully a way to move forward there. So as staff is still working with ecology, and as we still don't have a final flood review from FEMA, we are recommending that you, after the public hearing, not make final recommendations on the wetland or flood hazard area amendments this evening, and we anticipate bringing back those recommendations on April 16th. So that concludes my comments, so unless you have some questions at the moment, I'd recommend that you start the hearing.
I think we're ready to go with the public hearing. So, as I mentioned earlier, a little prematurely, we'd like all the people to come up and please state your name and address for the record, and please limit your comments to three minutes. So our first name on the item here is Mark Eaton. Okay. Lisa Keller. Okay. Janet Ketchum. Okay. Steve Yoder. No comment. Phyllis Finley.
Good evening. Phyllis Finley, 5962 Northeast Arrowhead Drive. What exactly is Kenmore's philosophy and practice regarding environmental stewardship? On the one hand, plastic bags are banned. On the other hand, a heron banner is hoisted to cover the stacks that spew toxic fumes into the air. It's hard for me to figure out where Kenmore is. Some of the proposed changes to the critical area regulations in Shoreline Master Program, among them, and specifically to the PAW, seem to be to facilitate Kenmore's desire to denigrate the wetland buffer at St. Edward State Park for their ball field proposal. Is that just a coincidence? Doesn't seem like it. Some proposals seem to make it easier to impact wetlands and shorelines at Log Boom Park and change the Swamp Creek environmental designation. I'm requesting that the City of Kenmore be consistently proactive in protecting our city's natural resources, even when such protection means altering the city's development plans. We should all be so lucky as to have the power and ability to change regulations to fit our plans. Please do not abuse this power and ability. Thank you.
Thank you, Phyllis. Are there any other people in the audience whose names have not been called who would like to speak? Please come up and, again, state your name and address for the record.
John Hendrickson, Kenmore, Washington. I signed up, so I don't know. Anyway.
No, you did.
Okay, thank you.
My apologies.
I'd like to talk to the commission about the amendment to the PAW provision, the exception for public agency utility exceptions. I was on the city council for 8 years, so I'd like to go through a little bit of the history, because I was on the council back in 2008 when we first tried to use this to build a ball field at St. Edward State Park. And not only that, we tried to use it for Log Boom Park and Wallace Park. And one of the problems was citizens were coming up and saying, hey, you can't use this. This is only for utilities to put a electric, telephone, sewer through the wetlands. You're building a ball field. And I repeatedly asked, and Debbie Bent was the person I was asking, is this legal? Because everyone's saying this isn't right. And we were assured it was legal until one citizen, for months, almost a year, I think, and one citizen finally hired an attorney, paid $3,000, got a legal opinion saying you can't do this. And as soon as we got that legal opinion, guess what? Our attorney went to us, and this is the sum total of our legal counsel on this issue. Well, the law says we can't do it. So for a year, we were being told repeatedly, we can do it. And then when someone hires an attorney, we can't do it, it's illegal. So in 2015, undaunted, the council came back to do it again. And the reason was there was new state parks commissioners. Brent Smith proposed it. I'd like you to review that history. Oh, also, we lost, back in 2008, we spent $290,000 pre-development costs we had to abandon. And Log Boom Park, I'm thinking, might be the reason why you're being asked to amend this PAW permit so that they can violate environmental protection laws and go through with the Log Boom Park project. You should be aware. So anyway, they came back in 2015, wanted to do it again. The reason was we have new parks commissioners. And let's go ahead and just amend the PAW legislation, which hopefully you know that was appealed and was overturned. City didn't do anything about best available science on that. They actually didn't even tell the public for over a month while the city was working on it. They proposed it in November, December 2015. 2016, it wasn't on the schedule for the retreat, but they discussed it at the retreat. Came in the first week, first meeting in January 11th, and went public. At that time, Brent Smith put out an email bragging about how no one knows about this yet. They've got it all the way, they're working this thing forward, going to push it through. And wanted people to come to support it. Well, at that meeting, the city's plan was to do over-engineering of the drainage of the wetland at St. Ed's Park. And then they were going to mitigate it by doing $40,000 of off-site development. This is a biodiversity corridor up there. Should be protected, and the city didn't even care enough to even do mitigation at the site. And if you look at they changed their wetland plan, they moved the stream that's at the south end of the field, they moved it off their study like 400 feet away. They had to change it back. We asked them to change it back. So
John, I apologize, the timer is not working, but you're past your 3 minutes.
Yeah, you guys mind if I just go through this last part about this? We'll give you
another minute.
Thank you. There's an opinion letter from the Department of Commerce, which several of you have told me that you have not received. The Department of Commerce gave that to the city on January 22nd of 19. And they're polite, but they don't really like what you're trying to do with this PAW permit. Okay? They suggest you should narrow the scope and limit it to existing facilities. You should show how this amendment warrants a different process than the regular development policies. Why are you even doing this? They ask you to explain expanding the exempt projects from critical area regulations can be done without impacting the function and values of the wetland. And so they note in there that the city's consultant said that the city's going to their best available science that they're going to give us is okay to use because the city thoughtfully designed any impact is the
Okay, John, could you please wrap it up here? We've given
Yep.
you,
that the city has a thoughtfully designed critical areas, that any impacts are appropriately minimized and mitigated. Go back to what I said in 2015. They're going to drain a wetland, and they're going to pay $40,000 off-site mitigation in a biodiversity corridor up at St. Ed's. So appreciate if you look through the rest of it. Thanks for the extra time.
thank you. Anyone else whose name was not on our list caring to share any thoughts? Going once, going twice. Thank you. So I believe that closes the public hearing. The next agenda item is final recommendations.
So, again, staff is recommending that if you are ready to make your final recommendations based on the preliminary amendments that you've reviewed and the public testimony tonight, you can do so. We would suggest that you hold off on the wetland and the flood regulations until the 16th. It probably would be helpful if I commented on a couple of the public comments that you heard tonight, if you wish me to do so.
I would be open to that. Go
Okay.
right ahead.
First of all, as far as the PAW, the PAUE, that is at this point unrelated to the St. Edward State Park ball fields. Those ball fields have a permit application in through a variance process under current regulations. Second of all, the PAUE could not be used at Log Boom Park. That's a specifically prohibited process in the shoreline jurisdiction. So the PAUE is not effective in any of the shoreline jurisdiction. And the last thing I wanted to comment on was that the letter from Commerce actually was in your January 26th Planning Commission packet. I inadvertently called it a letter from Ecology, which it was not, and we corrected that. But the Commerce letter was in that packet, and the Commerce letter is why the PAUE was revised, the version that you saw, in response to the Commerce comments. So.
Anybody have any questions for Lori about those comments or?
Do you have a timeline for when we expect to get the final?
The final. We're targeting the second meeting in April 16th, to bring back hopefully we'll have come to some agreement on that topic. And we are expecting to send out our next recommendation to Ecology for their review probably in the next week. And then they are aware that it's coming and have told us that they will reserve time on their calendars to look at it, hoping to meet that April 16th timeline. Mm-hmm.
Any other comments or questions for staff or others? So Lori, I'm looking at the agenda items. You're recommending that we make our recommendations on all again, but those two you mentioned, can you go over that one more time? so we know
Yeah.
what we are being asked to.
Okay, so it's probably easiest if you look at the, maybe your attachment at the last page of the memo, the cover memo. And it's attachments 1 through, let's see here, 1 through 10, but not the wetlands section, which is the attachment 2, or the flood hazard regulations, which are attachment 6. Oh, Bridget's going to come over here and call this up for us.
One. I'll start with attachment 1 there.
Actually, I think
Which
we
one?
could go to the memo.
Okay.
Thanks, Bridget.
You can scroll there.
Can you move it down to the bottom by the attachments? Here we go. Okay, so if the Planning Commission is ready to make final recommendations, I would suggest that you consider doing that for attachment 1. That's the revised definition. Attachment 3, which are the stream and lake regulations. Attachment 4, which are the fish and wildlife habitat area regulations. Attachment 5, the geologically hazardous area regulations. Not attachment 6, but attachment 7, which are the groundwater regulations. Attachment 8, that's the comprehensive plan, shoreline subelement. Attachment 9, those are the shoreline regulations. Attachment 10, which are amendments to other sections in the municipal code necessitated by the PAUE amendments. And then attachment 12 and attachment 13, which are the maps, the shoreline maps, one that goes in the comprehensive plan and one that is the regulatory map.
Okay, do I hear a motion? Mr. Vanderline.
I move that we approve the recommendations of the staff and lead to, separately for the critical areas from the shoreline master plan, or can we do it all together?
I think you can do it all together. Yeah. Let me just step back 1 second. I would do all the regulations together. I would do the shoreline sub-element, which is actually a comprehensive plan change. I would do that separately. That's attachment 8.
So I move that the planning commission approve the recommendation of the staff related to attachments 1, 3, 4, 5, 7, 9, 12, and 13.
Yeah, although I'm so sorry. Attachment 12 is also the comp plan. So if you could take attachment 12 out of there and then put that with attachment 8.
4, 5, 7, 9, and 13.
Lori, did you say 10 as well? I didn't mark down that you had said 10.
Right, 10 as well.
10 as well.
We have a motion on the floor. Is there a second? Okay, we have a motion and a second. Is there any discussion on the motion? Commissioner Moll, Vice Chair Moll.
Hi. We had a question at our last meeting, and I think we were going to either come back with it this evening or at our next meeting, which was a specific delineation between what was the Lake Washington and Sammamish River dividing line. Is that available in the packet this evening?
Right. That is actually on the shoreline regulatory map, which is my attachments aren't numbered. Is that not there? Look, it's not on the map.
I'll get there.
We have a map, and it is, we had a version of the map. Oh, okay. It's an inset on attachment 13. On attachment 13, she's going to call it up. So this is a regulatory map, and if you look at the inset there, it shows where the line is, the blue dashed line is the distinction between Lake Washington and the Sammamish River as proposed.
Great, thank you.
You're welcome.
Any other questions, discussion? Okay, before we vote, can you, again, one more time, reread the motion so we are certain we're all on the same page here?
Okay. My understanding is that you are recommending or forwarding the staff recommendation on attachment 1, attachment 3, attachment 4, attachment 5, attachment 7, attachment 9, attachment 10, and attachment 13.
Okay, everybody on board? Okay, all in favor, say,
I have
excuse me,
a-
excuse me?
I
Commissioner
I
Graves.
would prefer that we leave 10 off of the list for right now. Since there were a number of questions about it, I don't feel comfortable voting on that until I've had a chance to dig in a little bit more.
If we're doing that, let me just make sure that the main section on the PAUE is also extracted, if that's your desire. And I think it's in attachment 2. I think it's in the initial. Okay. So you're not reviewing attachment 2, so that's fine.
Okay.
So is your concern,
Yes.
are you okay with
So,
proceeding with the vote on the,
and it would be to remove 10 also.
okay, do you want to make an amendment to the motion?
Yes.
Do you have to amend the motion?
I'd like to see us go to a vote if we get a second, including 10. If we don't, then let's come back and take it off the list. But let's see if we can get a poll with the commission.
So one more time, Mike, how would that work?
I propose a motion that includes attachment 10 recommendations in attachment 10. Rather than amend it, that motion, saying I'd like to see that.
Okay, so you want to make that motion again?
I will. Same motion, that the commission send recommendations approving, supporting attachments 1, 3, 4, 5, 7, 9, 10, and 13.
Okay, is there a second to that motion? Commissioner Lucis. Okay, we have a motion and a second. Any discussion on that? Okay, all in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed?
Nay.
Okay. Motion passes 5 to 1.
5 to 2. I voted
This is
against.
in your blind spot.
Sorry, I voted against.
Excuse me, 4 to 2, I didn't see you. Thank you. Okay, are there other,
If you were interested in making a motion related to the comprehensive plan amendments, that is attachment 8 and attachment 12.
anyone care to make a motion on those?
I'll make a motion that we vote to approve amendments 8 and 12 around the comprehensive plan amendments.
Is there a second? Commissioner Lucis, okay, we have a motion and a second. Any discussion on that motion?
No.
Any discussion on that motion? Okay, all in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed?
That wasn't opposed.
That motion passes unanimously. I'll look both ways. So again, that leaves attachments 2 and 6 to be addressed at presumably April 16th, or,
Right, correct.
okay. Okay, are there any other items under that final recommendations bullet?
No, not under the final recommendations. As a follow-on to that, we would like to recommend that you cancel your April 2nd meeting. We had hoped to introduce the beginnings of your next project, but council did not take action on an item last night, so we're not going to be able to do that on April 2nd. So we'll, if the commission wishes to cancel that meeting, then we'll be back on the 16th with the rest of this information.
Okay. Anybody want to propose a motion to that effect, to cancel our April 2nd meeting?
I propose we cancel the April 2nd meeting.
Any second?
Second.
Second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? We will cancel the April 2nd meeting. Anything else tonight for us? Anything else from fellow commissioners?
Confirm again that we have quorum for the meeting the 16th?
Oh, that is your regular meeting, but if you want. Okay. So anyone else who anticipates being absent? Okay, so it looks like we'll have.
Okay, anything else? Okay,
Question.
Commissioner
Do
Vanderline.
we have any update on what the new docket items will include?
So the docket that the council approved addresses ADUs, accessory dwelling units, looking over our standards and trying to incorporate some regional ideas that have come forward. And then following that, there would be incentives for office development. That came out of the economic development strategy, and we're waiting for a consultant report, so it would follow the ADU project. The action that I was speaking of last evening has to do with the manufactured housing communities. And so we anticipate that the council will rezone those properties to a new zoning district. There's a companion resolution that directs back to the Planning Commission the notion of looking at upzoning with affordability requirements. This was your initial recommendation, and the council wants to pursue that into the future. So maybe in 10 years is what they've been talking about. They would want that action to happen, but they would like to have the commission's perspective on what's an appropriate level of density, what's an appropriate level of affordability, et cetera. And comprehensive plan amendments are needed to do that. So that has to come before the Planning Commission. So we believe that we would be introducing that to you before we went to ADUs. Hopefully you'll all be familiar, most of you will be familiar with the whole discussion, so I'm not sure it will be a very big agenda item. But then the amendments would be held until the end of the year, because we're going to have pros plan amendments, and that's your last remaining big docket item for this year. In fact, it's probably the most significant docket item for the year. The Parks, Recreation, and Open Space Plan and Comprehensive Plan amendments related to that.
Just out of curiosity, was there any reason the resolution on the mobile homes didn't go through last night? I saw it was on the agenda.
Right. So I don't know what to say.
There were only 5 council members present last night, and being as this has been a topic where all council members have shown interest, they wanted to try and delay that to a meeting when they felt that all 7 council members would be present to take a vote.
Gotcha. Thank you. Vice Chair Melcar.
Can you remind me, what is the date of the current PROS plan that we'll be revisiting?
It was adopted in 2013, and typically to be eligible for state grants through the Recreation and Conservation Office, they're looking for it to be updated every 6 years. So this is the year, so we were trying to get that updated and in place before the next grant round of funding, which is in 2020.
Okay, anything else? All right, this meeting is adjourned. Thank you.